I've been in the audio business for many, many years. Probably have lost track of when I actually began, but it was a dark and stormy night, I think. That's how it starts. Or actually, it was a dark and stormy night in a bar somewhere. Actually, I started out as a musician, and early on, being a musician, of course, so when I started, I really had to make my own way, and our band had to make our own way in terms of PA systems and technologies and everything. And how I started down the path of being a sound guy was really being the guy that actually took care of the PA. And of course, I think my first PA was, I believe, it was something with knobs on it, no faders. It probably was a Shure column with a Shure head, and we set it up at the side of the stage, and we started playing through it, and our voices came alive. And that's kind of where I began. And next thing I knew, I was, the guy setting up at high school and having some great high school concerts with my band and with our Shure PA, and of course our Shure PA just couldn't get loud enough, so next thing I knew, we saved up our shekels and we started down the road of buying PA gear, and that's how my life sort of morphed into the sound. The next thing I know is I find myself helping out other bands and other musicians who actually had bigger sound systems, and I kind of took on that role of the roadie, so to speak. And I do remember being in grade 9 and somewhere out in the wilderness in the Ottawa Valley for the summer with those really giant 8-foot high speakers that had two 15s in them and a 100-watt power amplifier and people screaming at us. It was an amazing time. But that's kind of how I got started with the live sound and the concerts and the touring. And eventually I found myself, of course, pursuing the path of being a musician as well as pursuing the path of being a designer even of loudspeakers. And my background, of course, is more or less out of Kingston, Ontario, and we spent a lot of time touring in Northern Ontario where you had absolutely nothing and you had to figure out how to fix it yourself or just do without. And of course I learned how to fix it myself, and that led to a pretty good knowledge of electronics eventually, and I started building loudspeakers. So somewhere in the 70s I started building actually self-powered loudspeakers, and that's how we toured around in our bands and everything, and had taken care of the speakers, and all the while also being the bass player in the band. And isn't that funny that most bass players find their path down that road? But then we moved on to other bigger events. The band got successful, and eventually we needed bigger PAs, and then we started buying or renting more of the PA than buying it. And then what we found ourselves in a place where we started opening for these larger acts, and I started to really see how big PAs could get, and that really, really interested me. There's a lot of really, really cool technology and things like that. So I continued on playing, but I also found myself in the recording studios. And in the recording studios, like many recording engineers' history, I ended up one night in the studio recording our tracks because the engineer didn't show up. He actually was too hungover. He'd been out for a while, so I said, okay, I think I can do this. And next thing I know, I'm recording, some of our demo tapes, and that actually turned out pretty well. And then somebody asked me to do something for them, and then I ended up either playing bass on people's tracks or playing bass and arranging and recording at the same time, and then recording more and more. And then somebody said, well, you know all this stuff about PAs too. Can you come and do my mix live? And next thing I know, I'm down the road of mixing things live. But one of the things that I found was when I was in the studios, in many of the different studios, there was always a maintenance challenge. So I always had to figure out how to make things work because, it was midnight when you got a chance to actually do music recording in some of the studios, and you had to figure out how to fix some of this stuff to do your sessions. So again, learning more about electronics was a really important part of it. So that led me to actually developing some type of devices, products for recording and amplifiers and things like that for people. And my career has been really happenstance. I've just always ended up in a very fortunate situation, or a situation where somebody could really use some help, and I ended up somewhat successful at it and carried on from it. So, I don't know, that's basically been my history. And today I find myself now with all the different experiences in recording, being a musician, recording, of course touring for many, many years around the world and using all these different systems. I found myself being able to do a lot of design and work for people, and more as time progressed, throughout the 90s, I started designing more and more systems for people in different parts of the world, and now today I find myself as a senior design engineer at Engineering Harmonics, where today, to this very day, I'm designing concert systems that go into concert halls, theaters, airports, all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, it's all been about audio, and audio has brought me around the world, and it's been an incredible career so far, and I hope to carry on for many years from now.